Welcome. My name is Chris Scacco, and I am the Associate Superintendent for District Operations for the Selah School District. I have held my position here for 23 years and still love what I do. Selah students are at the core of our decisions and are the essential driver in how funding flows to benefit them on a daily basis. I would like to thank you for listening today in an effort to learn more about the finances and budgeting and monitoring practices for Selah School District. I would like to introduce my panelists for today's session. First, Stephanie Henry, Director of Financial Services, Jeff Cochran, Director of Futures and Assistant Principal for Selah High School, and Christy Arian, Director of State and Federal Programs. The intent of today's session is to give you all an overview of the district priorities and practices around district finance and budget development and monitoring practices for the Selah School District. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and dive into today's session. First, just an overall agenda for today's session. First, we'll talk about school district priorities. We'll talk about how our schools funded, impacts of career and technical education programs, state and federal programs, levy and local effort assistance, the budget development process, and overall budget monitoring. First, it's important for us to remind our audience whenever we talk about district finance that we want to make sure that everyone understands our mission and our core purpose. You can see in the presentation there that the Selah School District, in partnership with students, parents, and community, cultivates a culture of lifelong learning for all. And that's been our mission here in Selah School District for quite some time. Our core purpose is to ensure high levels of learning for all students. Our vision, portrait of a graduate, every student future ready by being able to collaborate, innovate, communicate, show empathy, and resilience. We hope that every student that leaves our system experiences and can exhibit those traits as they leave our system. Character, capable, and college and career ready. These are our core beliefs here at Selah School District, and this is what we hope for all students leaving our system. The Viking Promise, our goal is to meet the needs of the whole child by creating an equity-centered, engaging, and personalized learning experience in an emotionally and physically safe environment for each child in Selah. Okay, so diving in, our first question, how are school districts funded? So you can see here on the screen that the state resources make up about 81% of our district finances. Just our general apportionment process, special education funding, learning assistance programs. So a lot of special funding comes into play under state resources. You can see they're all listed there, including local effort assistance. We also receive federal resources. About 12% of our budget is made up of federal resources, and 81% was state resources. So federal resources are 12%. You can see Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV grants, federal special ed funding, and right now our COVID federal relief funding, and also federal vocational grants. Other resources in our budget make up about 7% of our budget. So local levy funding, other local receipts like donations, fees, fines, etc. Those are in the other category for funding for Selah School District. And this is fairly common percentages for most school districts. All school districts are most heavily weighted with state resources, and that's where they receive the majority of their funding. How are basic education revenues generated? So obviously our basic education revenues make up the highest percentage of our budget. Most state funding is determined by student enrollment. So it's important for us as we begin budgeting in any given year to do our due diligence in projecting enrollment for the following school year. And that drives what we expect to receive in a variety of funding sources. And our funding is based, our basic education funding is driven by our annual average full-time equivalent student enrollment at the end of the year. So we have our student counts all year long, and at the end there's an average, and that average enrollment is used to drive a lot of our funding. The prototypical funding formula uses enrollment to generate state basic education funding. And those factors are set at the state level. And for the 21-22 school year, for each full-time student, it equates to about roughly $10,000 in basic education funding. On this slide, you can see our student enrollment history. Over time, for the most part, our district enrollment has increased 1% to 2%. Over time, you'll see there's a few dips there. The 1920 year, we saw a pretty good increase, and then we saw a drop in the 2021 school year when COVID hit. And this is not uncommon for most school districts. Are experiencing a decline in enrollment, or they did last year during COVID. Fortunately, Selah is beginning to gain student enrollment back. Students are continuing to enter our system, and so we're doing. Our numbers are looking favorably for this school year and recovering quite well. A lot of school districts are not in that position, so we're thankful that families have trust in us in bringing their kids back to our system. Last year, at the end of August 31, 2021, we were 148 FTE under projection, which was about a $1.3 million loss in state funding for enrollment under basic education. So we, fortunately, with the federal funds that the district received for the COVID ESSER funding, we were able to recover that $1.3 million. At this point, I'll turn it over to Jeff Cochran, and he'll talk about our CTE program.
So let's talk about how CTE funding is slightly different than BEA or basic education funding. So basic education allotment is $8,726 per full-time equivalency, so full-time students. Career and technical education, these are programs like your culinary programs, your engineering programs, your metal manufacturing programs. These are programs that cost significantly more than a traditional educational experience for a student. So, in other words, we're not just buying books, we're buying costly materials, we're buying metals, we're buying woods. We're using these materials to instruct, changing the modality of instruction, but keeping the standards the same. So, in other words, some of our engineering classes count for algebra. So these classes, students are doing project-based learning. They're working with materials. They're working with content that is different in terms of the modality, but the standards are the same. So the state recognizes that and funds that at a higher level. So that's funded at $9,718 per full-time student, as you can see here. That's the high cost of programs, and that helps fund these different educational experiences for our students. Now in Selah, in 2018, we were at 180 full-time equivalency students. So that was our FTE, you might call it, for CTE. And this year we're up to an average of 340. So you can do the math. We have increased significantly over the years. And that's due to, we're having great programs, but it's also due to students wanting a different experience in school, wanting to understand things differently, wanting to develop an understanding through project-based learning, through these different pathways that we offer. And the pathways we offer are here: health sciences, engineering, manufacturing, marketing, hospitality, early childhood and K-12 education, digital media and communications, computer science, and agricultural science. So these programs go into, and they have to, statewide, they have significant requirements in order to get that full-time equivalency for a CTE. Teachers have to, CTE teachers have to run what's called a CTSO. It's basically a club, but it has to compete. Teachers have to attend regional advisory boards, which go through and have businesses come in and tell us, hey, here are the things that we think you should be doing in school. They can also offer us instructions and guidance on our lessons, our modalities, our content, our equipment, all of that. So it's really business informed, as well as our secondary partners. So our universities, our Tech, our technical colleges, those go through and offer us some significant help through the process. So it's really informed by that second level. CTE also has the opportunity to receive several grants, and we've been very, very successful. So total awarded, actually, this went up last week. We're up to nearly $260,000 awarded in grants this year. But one we always get, we still have to apply for it every year. But it's the federal Perkins grant. This is a grant. It's the Carl Perkins grant. It goes through to all CTE programs above a certain FTE, and then what it does is it helps fund those extra things. In Selah, what we do is I have us on a 5-year cycle. So each year, a certain program is up for Perkins Reserve funding, and then those are kind of our big ticket purchase items for the year, and it's on a 5-year cycle based on our programs. This year, we also received some Perkins Reserve special projects. These are extras, essentially, that we apply for. This year, we got a STEM $5,000 grant. We got a grant to help travel with our CTSOs, our clubs, and several other kind of small $500 to $1,000 grants. We also, you can see here, I'm not going to read down the list, but we received several state grants. We in CTE we try to fund it. We try to find as much funding as possible, so we can give kids the best experience possible. So this is really a way that we bring in new content, we bring in new curriculum, we bring in new materials. For example, last year we had a $5,000 grant award for drones. And we use that in an agricultural science program. So they map out different areas. We have software that maps fields out and can start identifying crops, identifying certain weeds and other things that might be growing. So really, really neat opportunities for students that we wouldn't otherwise have unless we were to receive some of these grants. You can also see, there's a cybersecurity in there, computer science. One of our growing programs and statewide is growing is our computer science programs. These are costly because it does take more technology and it does take more curriculum because it's a brand new program. So it's really difficult. We have a great teacher, Lane Roberts, who's doing a really, really good job. But also it involves training him and getting him up to speed on the content that we want our computer science students to get. So not only are the programs costly, but there are funding sources available, and we go out and we find as much as possible, because we want our students to have the greatest experience possible in our classes. So here you can see, I talked about a 5-year focus with the Perkins. We also, any kind of grant that's $20,000 or above, I put on a specific program. So you can see last year that was our computer science and family and consumer sciences. So family and consumer sciences, that's culinary science, that's early childhood education. Those are like our classes we call adulting, where we're teaching students the skills they need to be an adult. As an example, a couple of weeks ago, they learned how to change a tire. They learned how to change their oil. They're learning how to do their taxes. All those classes that you hear about, people on Facebook and things are saying, oh, why don't we teach that in school? We do. It's in our adulting class. It's in our grad launch classes. So that was our focus in Perkins. Last year, we also upgraded our culinary lab and greenhouse. So we were really low on space because our culinary science program is booming. So we really need to upgrade some things there. And our greenhouse, many of you have seen on social media, but we have upgraded that, and it is a gorgeous space, and it's almost fully automated. So it's up to industry standards. So we had our partners come in and say, hey, what should we do in this space that you're doing out there in your orchards? What are you doing in your greenhouses? And we were asking business partners. This year, this year and I guess last year as well, we're talking manufacture labs, we're talking ag science labs. Those are all of our really big ticket items. We replaced a lot of tools that were 20 years old. Any of you out there are woodworkers or metal workers, you know that things have changed significantly, have gotten more efficient. And we went to our business partners and said, hey, what do we need to do in the welding area? So we upgraded our whole welding room. We upgraded our ShopBot tools, automated CNC machines to better fit what they're doing in industry. So we're really helping and upgrading our manufacturing labs. This year, it's a lot of health sciences. It's a lot of marketing and digital media. So we're upgrading cameras, filming. We're not like taking pictures in a dark room anymore. We need cameras. We added another teacher in that program this year. And so we really, we had enough for one teacher to teach it. Now we needed enough for two. So we upgraded that as well. You can see what's coming up. We do a good job of really focusing on these. This is a funding focus that our teachers helped come up with, and we just go with it. And we've been very fortunate that this cycle has helped us make sure we fund everything we need to.
Next, I'd like to introduce Christy Arian again. She's our Director for State and Federal Programs.
So for state and federal programs, a lot of our enrollment or funding comes from enrollment data, as well as in some areas it is program participation or our high poverty data. So going into our first one with Title I, Part A, this is to provide equitable opportunities for students at risk. It is a federal grant that can cover the needs for the students at the entire school at a school-wide level if our poverty is over 40% in that school. So we do use the poverty data to determine school-wide versus targeted for Title I, Part A, and targeted would only address the needs of students who meet the at-risk criterion. And school-wide, we can use our resources and our funding for all students who are in that school. And most of our use of funds for Title I goes into staffing, as well as our parent and family engagement pot of money. That is at a 1% of that $800,000 that you see there goes directly set aside for parent and family engagement. So LAP is the state-funded version of Title I. And again, this is to provide equitable opportunities for students who are at risk of academic achievement by removing barriers, making sure interventions match their need. So a lot of our schools are using a multi-tiered system of supports, and those needs play a part in the Tier 1 and Tier 3 supports that they receive, mostly in English language arts, mathematics for K-12 grades, and then graduation assistance for grades 11 and 12. So a lot of our funds go into staffing and materials to run those intervention programs.
Okay, next I would like to turn it over to Stephanie.
Our next state and federal programs that we will look at is Title II, Title III, TBIP, and Title IV. So Title II is really about supporting effective instruction. So it really dives into what does our instruction look like and what professional development are we providing our teachers to meet the needs of at-risk students. With our dollar allocation there, a lot of it is spent in our BEST mentorship program, which is beginning educator support for teachers that are in their first 3 years of teaching. And so we provide a mentor for them to help them develop skills, their instructional practices, and then getting some coaching from their mentor as well. So the Title III and TBIP are the federal and state funded programs for language acquisition. And so our students who are qualifying for these two programs, it really boils down to the home language survey that's filled out at the beginning of the year for TBIP. And then for Title III, it would be for academic students who are struggling with academics. And so we would look at their scores for, we would use iReady, we would use the SBAC to really focus on what academic supports they might need when it comes to language. So a lot of our funding goes into staffing, materials and supplies, as well as professional development around language standards and language acquisition strategies like GLAD strategies. So Title IV really it has three parts to it. It's well-rounded education for students, as well as safe and healthy students, and then the effective use of technology. And that's more than just the infrastructure. It's really diving into how are we using technology in our instruction. And so a lot of our funds of that 50,000, 56,000 there is in our equity PD, our counseling programs, our multi-tiered system of supports like we mentioned for LAP, and that is also working in Selah as well, the social emotional learning of students, not just academics, in order to have that well-rounded education. So really what's important to remember about our state and federal programs is that it's not a replacement of the basic education allocation dollars. It's on top of. And so the basic ed, if you want to think of like an ice cream cone, our basic ed is that cone, and our Title I could be the vanilla ice cream that we add to the cone. And these state and federal programs are really the sprinkles, the whipped cream, the cherry. You can't have an ice cream sundae without the cone and the ice cream. So we have to meet the needs under those allocations before we can dive into our state and federal program dollars.
Okay, next I'd like to turn it over to Stephanie Henry, our Director of Financial Services, and she's going to talk about the COVID ESSER funding and levy. So we'll turn it over to her.
All right, so one area we kind of wanted to briefly cover, since it's relatively new, but it's pretty significant, is our COVID relief funding. Past couple of years, due to the COVID pandemic, we have received an total allocation of about $8.7 million in ESSER relief from COVID funding in 3 different allocations. You can see there on the screen those allocations. We've spent, as of the end of November, about 34% of that allocation and received that because it's a reimbursable grant. And we continue to spend that throughout the rest of the duration of those grants, which I'll cover on this slide. Those 3 allocations, we do have a timeline that we have to spend those by. We've already fully spent our first allocation, so that's completely done. But our second allocation, the $790,000 remaining, needs to be spent by the end of September 2023, and then the third allocation by the end of September 2024. These resources are pretty much used to address those additional costs that the district has incurred related to COVID. So our PPE equipment, cleaning, additional staff time, a lot of technology and connectivity for our students. That's where a lot of that money has gone so far. And on the screen here is our district's plan to spend the remainder of our funding. Most of it will be allocated towards our expanded summer school and after school programs to address learning loss, which is a requirement of that third allocation to spend at least 20% on addressing learning loss. We will also spend it on additional staffing, including counselors, special education, an EL interventionist, and preschool classified support, as well as a graduation coach. And then we'll continue our investment with technology and PPE, professional development, and air quality improvements. All right, and moving on, another source of funding for districts is levy. So we talked about our basic education funding at the beginning of this presentation, which is based on our enrollment that goes into that prototypical funding model. But a lot of times for most districts in the state, that funding isn't sufficient enough to fund our programs and activities that we have in our district. So lots of districts throughout the state, an option to find that funding or raise that funding is to go through an enrichment levy. And that's where we go to our voters with a proposal to collect additional property taxes to help fund those activities in our district. Selah recently passed a 2-year levy of $1.50 per thousand for the 2022 and 2023 tax years. And one caveat with this funding is it has to be spent on items beyond basic education. So whatever the state funds us for basic education, these funds go above and beyond that. So we can't use it to fund those basic needs of our students that the state already funds. So what do we spend our money on? We spend our levy money on additional staff to reduce class sizes, hours beyond the minimum instructional offerings, a lot of our extracurricular activities, sports and clubs, professional development, early learning activities, and all those other items listed there. And then kind of related to levy is local effort assistance. And this is kind of a complicated program to understand, but the general gist of this program is levy equalization. So property poor districts in the state are not able to levy using their levy as much as those property rich districts in the state. And the whole purpose of this LEA program, levy equalization, is to make sure that all students in the state are getting an equitable education. So take, for example, a Bellevue School District. They are a very large and very property rich district. If they were to pass a levy, say for 50 cents, they would easily be able to raise a significant amount more levy funding than, say, Selah, which is smaller tax base, more property poor than Bellevue. We would have to pass a levy rate higher than Bellevue to collect the same amount of money per student in our district. So this program comes into play to kind of level that playing field and help districts get enough revenue that it's equal throughout the state per pupil in their districts.
Okay, this is Chris again, and we are now the next question is, how does all of this fit into the development of the district's operating budget? We'd like to give you a few highlights on that. So what is a budget? A budget is the instrument which sets forth an annual financial plan for the achievement of the goals and objectives of the school district. The annual budget provides allocations of resources using district priorities as a filter in determining the spending plan for the year. The budget is also developed using district beliefs at the core of the decisions. And it's important during the budgeting process, and not just during the budgeting process, but all year long, that there is a lot of collaboration involved in what is working for kids, what's not working. There's a lot of players involved in those conversations to determine where our funds should be allocated and provided the different areas so that we are adequately addressing student needs. So again, it's a collaborative approach that happens all year long, not just during budget season. Budget development. So these are some key attributes of the budget development process. We want to make sure that we're ensuring student and staff safety first and foremost. Protect basic needs for educating the whole child. Provide equitable distribution of resources that recognize the diverse needs of all students. Priority in providing a personalized learning experience in an emotionally and physically safe environment. Maximize in-person instructional time. And that's something that we continue to talk about as we are navigating our way through this pandemic. Our top goal is to maximize in-person instructional time. Focus on student engagement during in-person and remote distance learning. When we do have to have remote and distance learning, which we still do have a small contingency of students in our distance learning model, we are focusing on student engagement during those times. Finally, meet legal compliance and educational standards. The first step in the budgeting process is to project student enrollment. As we discussed earlier, that is a main driver in our funding, both state and federal funding, is our student enrollment. So we go through a process. We use a cohort survival method in looking at projecting enrollment. Our straight cohort survival method is looking at the last 6 years, equally weighting each of the last 6 years and looking at the progression from one grade to the next and the survival of the students moving through the system. And then the other approach, the cohort, is a weighted method, and we look at the last 4 years, most heavily weighting the most current year back 4 years, and that is it represents more of a current projection of what the enrollment of the survival that has happened over the last 4 years. So we look at both the results of both of the projections using the straight and the weighted, and we take a look at where our actual enrollment is, at that point in time, which is typically the February enrollment in any given year. And then we make adjustments as needed. And then we come up with a final projection. There's a lot of discussion about the draft projection before it becomes finalized. And then that is used in driving staffing allocations. All right, and we're showing this slide one more time on the student enrollment history, just so you can see those are year-end averages year to year. So we're hoping to see, and we are seeing, like I mentioned earlier, a nice recovery of our student enrollment in the 21-22 school year. Project other revenue sources is the next step. So again, collaboration with program and district administrators. This would include all grants and other sources of revenue. So we have key players in our budget development process that are the oversight directors for, like Christy in the state and federal programs, Betty Lopez, our executive director for special education services, and Alicia Jacob, our executive director for student learning. We have a lot of those key players that are responsible for putting together budgets for those particular grants and sources of revenue. So it really is a team effort. We all work together and we collaborate often to actually come together and put a full budget together at the end of the spring. Normally our full budget comes together in June of any given year. Then our next step, really when we project enrollment, once our enrollment projections put together, then we use that to project our basic ed staffing. So we have enrollment projections by grade, by building, and we use that using the prototypical school model allocations, and we drive staffing allocations for each building. We use the projected revenues for other programs to fund program staff as well. Collaboration with building, program, and district administrators. Again, I know I've mentioned it several times, but that's essential in developing our budgets. And obviously the end game is to balance program revenues and expenditures. We like to maintain our ending cash reserve or fund balance year to year, but we have years where we need to utilize some of that cash reserve to be able to balance the budget. Then we move into the MSOC allocations, which are our materials, supplies, and operating costs. And that's a process we go through looking at trends, looking at our history, the last most recent years on where we've needed to spend funds. We've looked at what our utility costs are, insurance, and so on and so forth to put together those budgets for the various departments. We also work on building program budgets under the materials, supplies, and operating costs. We work with directors in putting together those budgets as well. And technology, that's a big component of our levy funding. We build that budget within our levy allocation and look at what our laptop needs are for the following school year. Chromebooks, there's a lot of technology, sometimes hotspots, and a lot of different hardware and software needs that we work with our director of technology, Greg Sugden, on, and we put together that budget. We look at curriculum needs. We look at from our executive director for student learning. She's essential in determining what our process is for any curriculum adoptions for the following year, and we utilize that along with looking at professional development, and we put those budgets together based on our needs for that next year. And then finally here we look at capital outlay needs. We for equipment and machinery, we look at what's upcoming in the district, things that we need to replace, and we budget for those things within the budget. Now I'll turn it back to Stephanie.
All right, so we've been talking all about the general fund and the way we operate. That's our primary fund that we do most of our business in, but we also have 5 other funds that we operate out of, and these are separated mostly for accounting purposes, but we'll start off with the capital projects fund. This one is used for building our buildings. So these are those big projects that we use to either repair major repairs or to build our new buildings in. Debt service fund, this is how we finance those buildings. We do redemption of bonds and the payment of interest on those bonds. And then we have our ASB fund, and this is for our associated student body. These are those funds that they fundraise for, use to do extracurricular activities. And this is primarily operated by those students because they are in charge of those funds. We just are in charge of recording it for accounting purposes. Transportation vehicle fund, this is where we purchase all of our buses and our transportation fleet. And then the private purpose trust fund, this is a fund where we hold on to any scholarship funds held in trust for different scholarships that are awarded to students at the end of the year. Big budget picture. So this, after all of that planning, all of that budgeting and teamwork and putting all of this stuff together, this is the outcome that we have. So we take a look at our projected revenue by resource. So we had our state general. Our state funding is about 61%. We kind of went over this in the beginning a little bit, but you'll see the overall picture of the entire budget from all of our work. And total expenditures, again, salary and benefits make up about 83% of our budget for the 21-22 school year, with purchase services at about 8% and supplies at 9%. And then just another look by category. Regular instruction is going to be the main source or expenditure of our budget at about 48%. Federal stimulus, those are those ESSER dollars at 3.8%. Special programs, 15%. Support services, 17%. And special education, 10.4%. And then we broke out another look at our levy and LEA by category and how we spend that. And again, majority is spent on teaching and learning at 60% and 20% on our co-curricular activities, and then 15% on technology.
This is Chris again, and one of the key components of our budgeting practices is always looking forward and forecasting down the road. We set our current budget and then we look forward and we say, okay, using our current spending trends and what we see to be our revenue trends, what does that look like down the road? And so we put together a 4-year forecast. It's required to be submitted as part of the budget every year to OSPI, the Office of Superintendent in Public Instruction. And so this slide and the next slide show you projected revenues and expenditures. We use, we look at the inflationary price deflator, IPD, when we look at what we think we're going to see in increases in state funding. Our local funding pretty much set with our levies that we've passed. And then our federal funding, we don't typically put, we put pretty small increases in our projections for federal funding. They don't typically change that much in normal years. Obviously, right now with our ESSER COVID relief funding, it is driving a spike in our federal funding, and so on and so forth. You can see that with our expenditures. Once we have our contracts set, our labor contracts, then that drives our staffing expenditures year to year. As Stephanie mentioned, our budget is about 83% employment, salary, and benefit costs. And that's typical for any given school district. All school districts in the state run around 80% or more in labor. So it is important to know what you're expected to spend in your labor contracts over the time period. So that's the biggest part of the expenditures. The other things we take a look at and project the best we can moving forward. So the bottom line of that, if we were to maintain the same spending levels moving forward, and again, we budget on the expenditure side a little bit aggressively for budget purposes, so we build capacity for the unforeseen. But overall, our budgeting practices are a conservative process. So you can see here, we would dip into our cash reserve over the next 4 years. Obviously, that's a high priority for us to keep intact. We want to ensure that our fiscal stability is maintained over time. So we will be making adjustments to our budgeting practices over the next 4 years so that we don't end up in year 4 of 24-25 with a 4% or $2.3 million cash reserve. Our board policy that our school board has adopted requires an 8% minimum fund balance policy, which is 8% of the budgeted expenditures. So we need to budget accordingly so that we can maintain that amount of money in the bank. You can also see on the fund balance run chart here that if we were to follow and actually experience that 4-year forecast, you would see a significant decline in our cash reserve there by 23-24. And so we wanted to show that to you on a chart. And that's not where we intend to end up, as I mentioned. So oversight and management. And again, this is a team effort. We have a lot of budget managers in the district, several people outside of even all of the directors that are responsible for their various programs. Obviously, in the end, Stephanie and I manage the overall finances for the district, and we keep close tabs on where we're at in spending every month. We review reports in detail by program. But we also have our directors that are looking at those things, and we also have building principals. We have a variety of people that are instrumental in the oversight of our trends and spending throughout the year and the revenues coming in. You can see here that there's a lot of, for oversight management, there's a continuous purchasing management and review process. So there's a lot of people involved in having the ability to purchase, and they when purchases are made, there's internal controls associated with approval of all the money being spent. That goes all the way to the school board, and the school board ultimately approves all expenditures for the district. Grant management and claiming. Stephanie is responsible for the claiming process for all of our grants, but we also, the management of the grants and keeping tabs on how the money's being spent and making sure we're complying with federal laws, state and federal laws. That's being done by the appropriate program directors. Monthly expenditure and revenue review. Again, we perform a detailed review at the district level, but we also have several people managing those budgets throughout the district as well. So it's just not one or two sets of eyes on the information. It's several people every month that are looking at that information. Budget status review. So at the end of every month, once we receive our report from the county treasurer's office, that's reconciled, and then we have a process to review our budget status reports every month. They ultimately get presented to the school board every month, and also to our union, our labor groups, the leadership of the labor groups, so they can keep a status or maintain an understanding of where we're at financially every month. Cash flow. We monitor our cash flow on a monthly basis as well to make sure that we have sufficient funds available to obviously pay our monthly bills and all that, and that's why it's important to keep a fiscally responsible level in our cash reserve. Monthly enrollment review. We we report our monthly student enrollment to the state every month. We also take a look at that and look at our trends, see how things are increases and decreases every month. We also provide that information to the school board on a monthly basis at our business meetings, and present it and send it out to the entire district so everyone can see what our trends are looking like in enrollment each month. Also, we stay current on legislative changes impacting school districts. As you know, the session is in process at the legislative level at this time. The session open January 10th, and it's supposed to be a 60-day shorter session. So hopefully that whole process will be complete earlier than normal, and we'll be able to produce a budget sooner than later. So we're excited about that, but we keep in touch with all the legislative changes as they occur throughout the budget season. And other than that, I'm going to turn it back to Stephanie to talk about other available resources for you to learn more about our budgeting process.
Yeah, so as we wrap it up here, we just want to make you aware of the available resources and information we have available to you on our district website. On our district website, if you go to the business services page, you will be able to access our monthly financial reports and fund balance information, as well as our monthly enrollment information. Our annual budget report and planning information, that 4-year forecast, is also out there, as well as a citizen's guide to the district budget. That document we started putting together this year. It gives kind of a clear kind of easy to understand version of the budget and how it all operates. So feel free to take a look at that. Our annual financial statements and notes are out there for the past several years, as well as ASB monthly financial reports and other information regarding ASB, and our district policy, forms, and procedures. And then also on this presentation, I included a link to the OSBI budget preparation website. You can find all sorts of budget preparation information there, applicable to school districts statewide. So, and then this presentation will also be posted on the website here shortly. And yeah, and here's our contact information as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any one of us, and we'll help you find what you're looking for.
Okay, and wrapping this up, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and also thank my colleagues here, the other panelists that are with you today. Please reach out to us if you have any questions. We're here to answer questions, if you want to come in and meet with us and talk more about our budgeting strategies and any of our financial information. We're more than happy to meet with you. And again, as Stephanie mentioned, our business services link out under departments on our website. We have a lot of financial information out there. So please go out and spend some time searching around. And then again, if you have questions, you can give us a call. So with that, thank you.